Hello, students. Welcome back to the third part of a discussion on the manifesto on third cinema, toward a third cinema, written by Solanus and Getino. We now come to the concluding part of the essay. Let me now make the presentation to proceed with our class. Give me a moment. Yes, I hope the screen is visible. Right. Yeah, so far we have seen the two filmmakers talking about third cinema and highlighting its differences from first and second cinema. In the last part, they focus exclusively on third cinema, its goals, its characteristics, and its various features. So let us now focus on the goals of third cinema as identified by the two filmmakers. Number one, construct a cinema which must be participatory in nature. At the very outset, we've realized how third cinema does not give priority to any individual. It is all about a collective effort. And in keeping with that concept, with that principle, they envision the whole project of third cinema as one that is participatory in nature, one which is interlinked, one which is committed, one which is therefore participatory, where everyone participates, and it is something that gets engaged in those whose life it portrays. So it is participatory in nature. They'll explain it further. Secondly, it had as another goal the bypassing of the conventional channels of production, distribution, and exhibition. In other words, at every stage, the film is different from conventional films in the making. That would include the script, the screenplay, the cast, the directors. They're all different from conventional films. We do not have the concept of the protagonist, the hero or the hero who looms large over everyone else. We do not have the director, the single director performing as an auteur, the person who's in control. We do not have the conventional production house or the producer dictating terms. And with regard to the shooting, again, we do not have the expensive sets. We do not have a screenplay or a script that has the conventional elements of a plot, a very engaging, or shall we say, a very thrilling kind of plot. So the very much like Italian neorealism here, the action would be shot on location, and you do not have any kind of contriving with regard to a thrilling plot or a thrilling climax. Nothing like that. It is as real can be. Then, it does not stop with these unconventional ways of making the movie. Even with regard to distribution, conventional cinema, first cinema and second cinema, they have their own channels of distribution. There is a distributor who buys the rights for the film, and then the distributor is the one who sends it to the ones, the theater owners who screen the movie. But here, the distribution is done in a very different manner. You do not have the conventional method of distribution, and then naturally, the method of exhibition is also different. You do not go to the theater and then just immerse yourself in the and lose yourself in in watching the movie, which is entertaining and which makes you a mute spectator. Here, even the screening and the watching of the movie is a daring act. That is why they call even that revolutionary. It is done against the restrictions imposed by the establishment, and therefore it is a political act, screening the movie secretly and then watching it secretly. And even with the watching, it does not end. The movie proceeds beyond the screening. You have the people participating in it, you have the people suggesting changes, and then the script keeps evolving, it keeps changing, and the movie itself keeps changing. Each screening, therefore, is a new screening, because by the time with the feedback from the audience taken, by the time of the next screening, you have a new scene added, you have a new, um, let's say, interview added. So it keeps changing. Each screening is a new experience. And they kept insisting that they have to find alternative ways of fundraising, circulation, and screening. The normal channels of filmmaking and film distribution do not work here. That is the second important goal. And the third one is to construct a free space for thinking and debate, a free space for politicizing the masses. So they believed in revolution, and they believed in alerting the people, awakening the people to revolution. So the screening of the movie was to be done in a free space, not just because it is one where the people have the freedom to go and watch it without paying, without making the conventional payment for a ticket. It's not just that. The free space enables you to think for yourself, and then to debate, to discuss, to voice your opinions. So free in that sense. So these are the three goals of third cinema. And thereby, with these three goals, the third cinema sought to become a part of the resistance struggle against neocolonialism and imperialism in culture. The very purpose of third cinema is to um, dislodge neocolonialism and imperialism, and it seeks the most revolutionary ways to do that. And one point, that they keep stressing is about the global appeal of third cinema. It may be made in a very um, limited, situation, in the sense that the problem that it deals with may be of very local concern, but the appeal is global or universal, because after all, it talks about an issue that concerns the whole world. And what is that? The freedom from imperialism and neocolonialism. So, third cinema just cannot be considered as universalist cinema. It does not have that kind of, you may say, a good classic cinema. It has universal appeal because it talks about love, it talks about passion, it talks about, let's say, war, and things like that, which seem to have universal appeal. That may be so, but the problems that third cinema deal with are not those grand uh, themes, grand universal themes. They deal with very specific local problems. The third cinema filmmaker must be always grounded in his or her reality, in his or her community, and be committed to his or her immediate regional or national reality of their society. So its appeal is definitely global. It can be, in a South American country, or in an African country, or be set in an Asian country. Its appeal may be global, but the concern is very much local, very much rooted, and very much concrete. Yeah, so this concreteness is an important point. It's a very concrete kind of cinema. It is not abstract. At no point does it, deal with a very abstract or mystical, or shall we say, uh, that kind of universalist themes. It is never abstract. There are universal ideas of art, culture, science, and politics, but there is nothing called universal when you come to the practice of filmmaking. Uh, you know, They keep insisting that you must deal with the local content, which is concrete, because that is their living reality. We need to remind ourselves about um, the powerful influence that Marxist thinking had on third cinema. Marxism, we know, is a philosophy of materialism. It is not something that is concerned with abstract universalist values. It is concerned about man's living reality, the material existence, the physical existence of man in society, the kind of society which is, or the kind of life which is determined by material um, entities like wealth, the means of production, the socio-economic relationship, and so on. So there's nothing abstract about the cinema. It is, yeah, it's a cinema of liberation, and it is very much rooted in the underdeveloped societies which are in the process of combating neo-colonial and imperialist influences. Now, like the goals, they highlight three very valuable concrete factors that shape third cinema. And these factors are: number one, the participant comrade, everyone involved in third cinema, from the the actors to the directors to the producers to the viewers to the everyone, everyone involved in it is a comrade, participant comrade. So that is the number one concrete factor: the participant comrade, the man actor accomplice who responds to the summons to make the film, to watch the film. There is a call and you respond to that. The next is the free space, where the film is made and where the film is screened. The free space where the participant comrade express his or her concerns and ideas and becomes politicized and begins to liberate himself. It's a wake up call that the participant comrade responds to in that free space. And finally, the third important concrete factor is the film itself, which is important as a detonator, like a weapon or a pretext. It is a pretext. The film is a pretext for change, for revolution. So these are the three valuable concrete factors. Yeah, in explanation, they say that third cinema is committed to the people, the participant comrade or the accomplice, the audience, which plays an important role in making the cinema, because the film is not made out of the money of studio or actors only. It's very much like a crowdfunding venture, where everyone contributes to the making of the film. And third cinema, they keep insisting, needs to explore the reality, the politics of art, culture, and representation in the people's sphere. Third cinema is always committed to the actor accomplice who are engaged in the film. And then, with regard to the screening, it is never made for conventional exhibition or screening. It is to be shown. They aspired to show their films in very unconventional spaces like tea houses, in the streets, at trade union meetings, in students' assembly halls, and so on, so that there is a space that the film creates for debate, very powerful political debate. And therefore, this is a film that just cannot be contained within its film text. The film text must surpass its textual or diegetic boundary. It is not contained. It's not a film that is uh, limited within its textual or audiovisual boundaries. It goes beyond that. The very existence of the film is beyond all its boundaries, because it keeps changing. It responds to the calls for change and it keeps evolving and changing. So, and anybody who came to the screening came with a full awareness that he or she was going against the regulations of the system, going against the laws, and exposing his or her personal security to eventual repression. So the person is not a mere spectator as you are when you watch a first cinema or second cinema. On the contrary, from the moment the audience decides to attend the showing, from the moment the audience lines themselves up on the side of the filmmakers by taking risks and contributing their living experience to the meeting, they too become actors. They are as important as the people who are shown on screen. And they become as important as the protagonist who might appear in the films. So, that is how it becomes totally participatory. And the spectator thus, becomes the actor too. And therefore, with each screening bringing in more changes, each projection of a film presupposes a different setting, since the space where it takes place, the materials that go up to make it, and the historic time in which it takes place are never the same. So the result of each projection act will depend on those who organize it, those who participate in it, and the time and the place, and so on. And the possibility of introducing variations, additions, and changes is unlimited. Yeah, so it may appeal to any situation. What was made by them in 1968, if it is screened today in some other country, it has a relevance because it is connected in various ways to that country's problem too. And it can bring about some change. So the perspectives of third cinema will never be exhausted in the struggle for power, but will continue after the taking of power to strengthen the revolution. So its scope never ends at any point. It keeps, growing more and more relevant. Yeah, and since it is all about fighting against neocolonialism, the decolonization of the filmmaker and of the third film will be simultaneous acts to the extent that each contributes to collective decolonization. The battle begins without, outside, against the enemy who attacks us, but it also is within, inside, against the ideas and models of the enemy to be found inside each one of us. That person who has imbibed the values of colonialism or imperialism. Each one of us may have that element in us. So the screening will come into conflict with that within us, that colonialist or imperialist within us, that voice within us which is subservient to colonialism. So that is also awakened. That is how it is a movie of destruction and construction. Decolonizing action rescues with its practice the purest and the most vital impulses. It opposes the colonization of minds. It opposes to the colonization of minds the revolution of consciousness. The world is scrutinized, unraveled, and thereby rediscovered. And people are witness to a constant astonishment, a kind of second birth. So each screening actually leads to a kind of rebirth. They recover their early simplicity, their capacity for adventure, and their lethargic capacity for indignation comes to life. So they react. They begin to react in anger once their senses are alerted. Yeah, then they point out how in form, in content, of course, it's very different. It does not have the kind of storyline or screenplay that first or second cinema will have. In form, too, these films are unlike first and second cinema because these are unfinished products, because the full stop can never be put. They are constantly evolving and therefore constantly unfinished. And they say, this is an important quotation from this essay. Our time is one of hypothesis rather than thesis. Thesis is a consensus. From a hypothesis, you reach an antithesis, and then finally you come to a conclusion, a thesis statement. It's like a statement, it's like a truth that you prove. But here, that kind of final truth is never arrived at. You keep making hypotheses and get people to respond to that. So it is one of hypothesis which is always in a state of instability. It is not like a thesis which achieves stasis, which achieves a kind of full stop. If full stop, it is constantly asking questions. A hypothesis is nothing but a question. So it keeps problematizing situations. It keeps asking you questions and making you ponder over those questions. It is a kind of work that is in progress, always unfinished, always unordered, and it's a kind of violent work made with the camera in one hand and a rock in the other. Both are weapons. The camera is a weapon and a rock is also a weapon. And these works can never be, therefore, assessed according to the traditional theoretical and critical canons. When you have analyze a Hollywood film, you know that this is what it aims to do. And therefore, you can analyze it in a particular way. But you cannot use those yardsticks to analyze these films. That is a different thing. This is a different thing. So do not apply those rules to this. It's like we when we talk about Dalit aesthetics, for example, we say that Brahminical aesthetics can never be applied to Dalit literature because the end or the aim, the form, the content, everything is different. How can you continue to apply the yardsticks of another kind of literature to this one? In a similar manner, here also they say that you just cannot assess these films using the yardsticks that you use to assess a Hollywood movie, a first movie, or a first cinema kind of film, or a second film cinema kind of film. Yeah, so the ideas for our film theory, they say, and criticism will come to life through inhibition, removing practice and experimentation. Knowledge begins with practice. So it is only in practice, in more and more practice, that you hope to reach somewhere towards knowledge. So that point regarding the unfinished nature of this kind of cinema, the constantly, it is always in a state of becoming. It can never be considered as something that has that is that has already been. It's not in a state of being, but it is in a state of becoming. Traditionally, we always say that drama is in a state of being because each version of a play, each presentation, each production is a new production. The actors perform the role all over each time they do it. So each presentation, each production, each performance of the play is a new one, and that is why it is said to be always in a state of becoming, compared to film, which is made, which is finished, and therefore it is in a state of being. But what you traditionally associate with drama as an art of becoming is something that you can attribute to third cinema. It is in a state of becoming. It is never in a state of being. ഇത് അവസാനിച്ചു, ഇതാണ് ഇതിൻ്റെ കാര്യം എന്ന് നമ്മൾക്ക് ഒരിക്കലും പറയാൻ പറ്റില്ല. Yeah, so it was, we talked about the four manifestos, one of which is the one that we are discussing. Another one is the one written by the Cuban writer Garcia Espinosa. He too, in the very title of that manifesto is For an Imperfect Cinema. He too talks about the imperfect cinema that does not have a proper closure. It must never look like a closed text. Yeah, then this is a cinema of praxis. In other words, it's a very Marxist kind of concept, praxis, where theory and practice go hand in hand. You do not have a separation between theory and practice. They are connected to one another. And every practice generates a theory, and every theory must be applied in practice. And this very manifesto, we know that it is integrally connected to the hour of the furnaces. So, coupled together, the hour of the furnaces and this manifesto form a perfect example of the cinema of praxis. Yeah. If there is a critic who feels that third cinema is like a pamphlet, it is didactic and it's a pamphlet, fine. Yes, it is a pamphlet because its intention is to make the revolutionary activist agitate. It could be a film which gives us a shock, which actually tries to remind us that convention is not truth and capitalism is not at all a true solution and uncontested system. In other words, like we encountered in the songs of experience, there are never any ready made and final answers here. There is nothing that can be considered as traditional, conventional, and therefore eternal and true. Never. Everything is questioned and is always um, changing. Yeah, then they talk about the difference between the image as used in commercial cinema or first and second cinema and the image as used in third cinema. Imperialism and capitalism, whether in the consumer society or in the neo-colonized society, veil everything behind a screen of images and appearances. So, what you have in first cinema, what you have in second cinema, is a kind of performance. It is a kind of, you have a lot of images which are not the real. It may be based on a real event. It may be based, let us say, on a particular episode of the Second World War, one of the battles of the Second World War. Schindler's List ഒക്കെ പോലെയുള്ള ഒരു film. But then what does it do? It does not show you the real scenes. It gets actors to perform. It gets an artificial location to um, or a setting or a studio to shoot the film and so on. So everything is what you see there is only an image. It is never the real thing. But in third cinema, it is the real that is always projected. The image of reality is more important than reality itself in commercial cinema. It is a world where you have fantasies, phantoms, imaginary things in which what is ugly is always clothed in beauty, and beauty is often disguised as the hideous. The real is always hidden in commercial cinema, whereas in third cinema, the real is projected as such. When you want to show a revolution, you show the real revolution and not anything else. In the third cinema representative film that we are studying, Offside, for example, the film was shot on location exactly at the um, what is it? Uh, the Tehran Stadium, the Azadi Stadium in Tehran, where that all important match between Iran and Bahrain took place, and it was shot there. What was seen there was the real stadium with the real crowds, and the real match was happening inside. Of course, we don't get to see the match, but that's a different matter. But it was shot there. So what you see there is not a performance. What you see there is not actors acting. What you see there is the real thing. Yeah, and then you come to an important point in this essay where they talk about the two major methods of making third cinema. One is the guerrilla cinema, and the other is what they call the film act. The guerrilla cinema. Guerrilla, it's a word that is often used to describe a kind of a struggle. It's a kind of revolutionary struggle. It is not a normal kind of war. It's not a normal kind of struggle. It's a very revolutionary. We're totally different, totally against the system, and totally done in a very secretive manner and so on. So when these third cinema is often made like a guerrilla struggle. Guerrilla cinema is a collective filmmaking in order to combat neo-colonialism. It is like a guerrilla struggle, a liberation struggle for the people, fought by a small strategic group of armed force against the massive mechanism of a power, which is often backed by the neo-colonial force. The guerrilla struggle is an irregular war. It's never the conventional war. It is an irregular war and a revolutionary alternative of the oppressive neo-colonial regime. And similarly, guerrilla cinema too. It is a revolutionary alternative in cinema, posed against the dominance of First World and Second World, or First Cinema and Second Cinema, against the industrial cinema of surplus value. Here, the filmmaker is not merely an artist, but an artist who functions like a guerrilla fighter, who, by maintaining a perfect coordination with the other members of his group, all of who are participants, strikes on the enemy camp. And what is the enemy camp? Um, you know, the establishment, which upholds colonization or colonialism and imperialism. So they strike on the enemy camp. And what do they strike? What do they use to strike on the enemy camp? Their weapon. What is their weapon? The film. So the film is a weapon in very much the same way that a machine gun, like an AK-47, might be the weapon in the hands of a guerrilla fighter. We're familiar with guerrilla warfare in different parts of the world, in South America, even in many parts of India, in neighboring Sri Lanka. We've heard about the LTT and its the very irregular way in which they fought their wars. So, in this long war, this is a quotation from the essay, the camera is our rifle, and we move into a guerrilla activity. The work of a film guerrilla group is governed by strict disciplinary norms as to both work methods and security. So, they have their own rules and regulations. It is not the rules of the system, but they have a very strict disciplinary pattern of working. Otherwise, their venture would be misguided. They do not want that to happen. A revolutionary film group is in the same situation as a guerrilla unit. It cannot grow strong without military structures and command concepts. The group exists as a network of complementary responsibilities, as a sum and synthesis of abilities, in as much as it operates harmonically with a leadership that centralizes planning work and maintains its continuity. What is needed is to speak clearly, mark off the work areas, assign responsibilities, and take on the job as a rigorous militancy. We've heard of the LTT, they had Prabhakaran was their leader, and you had the the leaders, and each leader was in charge of something. It was a very coordinated act, the revolution, and that is how it is with these filmmakers too. Yeah, it proletarianizes the filmmaker and breaks down the intellectual aristocracy that the bourgeois grants to its followers. In other words, guerrilla filmmaking makes democracy possible in the very act of filmmaking. They act with a radically new vision of the role of the producer, of teamwork, of the tools, the details, and these filmmakers supply themselves with to they look after their own needs. They make the necessary arrangements to give themselves the supplies, to get the equipment, and they learn the very technique of making films. They do not want to be dependent on outside agencies. Everyone knows the craft. Their most valuable possessions are the tools of the trade, which form part and parcel of their need to communicate. The camera is the inexhaustible expropriator of image weapons. The projector, a gun that can shoot 24 frames per second. And each member of the group should be trained, at least in a general way, with the equipment that they use. And they must be replaced. They must be able to replace. They must be prepared to replace the other. Suppose that person is unable to shoot the next scene. Suppose that person has been killed by the enemy, for example, the show must go on, the filming must go on, and the other person should be able to step into his or her shoes. So the myth of irreplaceable technicians must be exploded. In Hollywood cinema, we hear about, there's nobody to beat this person with regard to music, with regard to camera work, with regard to direction, and so on. You think that Steven Spielberg is, irreplaceable. You think that someone else is irreplaceable, and so on. That is a myth, according to these filmmakers. You should explode that myth. It must be, totally rejected. Nobody is indispensable. In other words, everyone must be prepared to take on the responsibility of every stage of filmmaking, and they must find their own means for financing, for equipping, for everything. A film can be made, but if its distribution does not allow for the recovery of the cost, it will be difficult or impossible to make a second film. So that is something that they must be very much concerned about. So this cinema of the masses, which is prevented from reaching beyond the sectors representing the masses, provokes with each showing as a revolutionary military incursion, a liberated space, a decolonized territory. And the showing or the screening can be turned into a political event, which, as Frantz Fanon said, can be a liturgical act, a privileged occasion for human beings to hear and to be heard. Now, that is guerrilla filmmaking. What about the other one? That is what they call the film act, the second method of making third cinema, where the filmmaker is an activist. The film act is materialized by collecting first hand information of their social situation from the people and then analyzing them following a revolutionary logic of uncovering the neo-colonial interests. The film act gives rise to a new sense of historicity, which aims at deconstructing the false consciousness implanted by colonial and neo-colonial forces on the minds of the people. Film act gives a call to its audience to tear the veils of false ideas and act to achieve revolutionary alternatives through cinema. And the filmmaker here is not an auteur, but an activist who acts for the people's liberation. So, this is what they aim to make, the film act. They cannot call it a mere film, it is a film act. It is not a conventional film at all. Their films can only be called film acts because the filmmaker here is an activist. And both guerrilla cinema and film act, they contain infinite categories: film letter, film poem, film essay, film pamphlet, film report, etc. That is, the film may be in the form of a poem, the film may be in the form of an essay, the film may be in the form of a pamphlet. In other words, the film incorporates all these, the poem as part of the very act, the letter as part of the very act, and so on, which I'm sure you would be able to recognize in a movie like The Hour of the Furnaces. And they counter, what do they counter? The cinema of characters with one of themes. It's not the character who is important here, because character is basically an artificial, a fabricated thing. Shakespeare's Hamlet, for example, or a character in a movie is a fabricated entity, whereas here you're not so much concerned about the characters as you are about the theme. What is the theme? The theme is more important than the individual characters. It is not the cinema of individuals, it is a cinema of masses. It is not the cinema of the author, but the cinema of the operative group. It is not the cinema of neo-colonial misinformation, which misguides the people, but it is the cinema of information. It does not shy away from the fact that it is there to teach, it is there to give information, it is there to give propaganda. Yes, well, it is the cinema of information. It is not the cinema of escape. It does not take you into ഒരു മാസ്മരിക ലോകത്തിലേക്ക് അല്ല കൊണ്ടുപോകുന്നത്. Cinema does not make you forget everything. That kind. The first cinema, of course, does that. It hypnotizes you and makes you believe in whatever you see, the glory that you see there on the screen. But here, this is the cinema that focuses on the truth and does everything possible to recapture the truth, even in the most um, unvarnished manner. Truth as truth, presenting truth in as truthful a manner as possible. And it is not the cinema of passivity, but the cinema of aggression. So that is what third cinema is. And finally, they ask this question: why films and not some other form of artistic communication? Why did they insist so much on choosing the medium of films to make this kind of revolutionary statement? They say, if we choose films as a center of our propositions and debate, it is because that is our work front, and because the birth of a third cinema means, at least for us, the most important revolutionary artistic event of our times. They have no hesitation in saying that the film is the one that is the most powerful medium of expression, and they consider it the most revolutionary artistic event of our times. Well, so that is the essay. With these points, I hope you will be able to make better sense of the essay when you read it. Do read it. Do watch the documentary, The Hour of the Furnaces. And then, with that kind of knowledge that you gain about third cinema and what its proponents wanted to achieve through their kind of films, we will watch Offside and see in what ways it takes on the establishment and seeks to change the system that it fights against. Okay, so I'll see you in the next class. I'll stop the presentation now. Yeah, see you. So stop the recording. Okay.